Hi, it's the next part. Fair use, educational purposes. Like I said, all that only applies to the person. I'm not a person. I'm a man. I'm an individual. I'm not part of any group or anything else. Stand on your own 2 feet. Be your own authority. How to counter the credentials fallacy. There are several things that you can do in order to respond to someone who is using the credentials fallacy. You can use any combination of these strategies, and different ones will be more effective in different scenarios. Call out the use of the fallacy. Explicitly state that your opponent is using fallacious reasoning, and demonstrate the issue with their argument, which I think is the best way to go about it, because the only way people are going to learn is if you point these things out. A lot of these people online, you can point them out till you're blue in the face. They will still continue to be logically fallacious sophists that use rhetorical devices to try and sway people, weak-minded individuals, especially and people that don't know anything about these things. Yeah, because they're paid to do so. They're there to sow confusion and to not, like, what they call it, not what's the word I'm looking for? To not recognise what you're saying, but they do it on purpose. Yeah, you can tell them ones anyway, because as soon as you point out these fallacies and everything else, they just start arguing back and they avoid the issue and they keep carrying on and they try and use the red herring fallacy to change the subject and stuff and everything else. Real individuals will be like, all right, okay, I didn't realise that was a fallacy. Right, okay, so let's take it back and all this lot. You mean, and they'd listen to you. You know what I mean? They'd want to learn. Critical thinking, intelligent people would want to learn. Redirect the discussion back to the original argument. Since the main issue with the credentials fallacy is that it focuses on the individual making an argument rather than on the argument itself, the main way to deal with its use is to redirect the discussion back to the original argument. It's another good way as well. Take them back. Define what you mean by these words that they're using. Define what you mean and take them back to the original conversation. Stuff like that, yeah? Explain why credentials are not necessary in this case. And I've said that to you, that they'll probably say, oh, well, you're not a scientist. You mean you ain't got a PhD, you ain't a scientist, all this sort of stuff, you know what I mean? You don't need to have any credentials to be able to be a scientist. Science, like I keep saying, science doesn't belong to any institution or any government or anything or anybody else. It belongs to everybody. It belongs to the individual. It belongs to everybody. Yeah? Try to explain why it's reasonable to weigh in on the current discussion even without having formal credentials in the field. Well, I've just told you. Science doesn't belong to any institution or any government or anything else. It belongs to everybody. It belongs to the individual. Yeah? For example, you can point out that you don't have to be an author in order to criticise a book, which you don't. You don't have to be a movie director to criticise a movie. You don't have to be an author to criticise a book. Yeah? You don't have to be a chef to criticise some food that you've eaten in a restaurant somewhere, you know what I mean? You know what I mean? You don't have to be a scientist to criticise science and ask questions of science. I'll define what I mean by science. I mean like the mainstream science. The people that believe that they've got an authority in it and everything else when they actually haven't. Yeah? Show the issue with blindly relying on credentials. For example, you could point out that even in fields with many credible experts, there are situations where these experts disagree with each other. There's quite a few these mainstream scientists. They disagree with each other all the time. Yeah? Just because And just because there's a consensus on something and everyone seems to believe that something's true, doesn't mean it's true. If everyone believes something's true, that's the argumentum ad populum fallacy. Yeah? Same as appeal to consensus. It's still an ad populum fallacy. Demonstrate the issue with defining valid credentials. In some cases, it might be beneficial to point out that it's difficult to define what sort of credentials are expected in the first place. In situations where you do have relevant credentials that your opponent is unaware of, or the individual you're talking to is unaware of, you could point them out in order to support your stance, even if the attack on your lack of credentials was fallacious in the first place. But these credentials don't mean shit. They don't mean nothing. It's what you can practically demonstrate, what you can show to be true by using a practical demonstration. Yeah? Using natural or applied science, using tangible substance. Yeah? You can talk the good talk. You can use logical fallacies. You can use sophistry. You can use fucking rhetorical devices. You can use words as much as you like. Doesn't mean it's true. Practical demonstrations. Yeah? And everything in reality can be shown practically. Yeah? So if it's not in reality, then obviously it can't be shown practically. By using an experiment or whatever else. Yeah? Natural science. Tangible substance. If you're having trouble with what tangible substance is, see one of my previous videos. Furthermore, in some situations, the individual using this fallacy might be aware of your credentials, but will attempt to invalidate them in some manner. The response in such cases should be similar to the one used when the individual using this fallacy claims that you have no credentials at all, except that you have the additional option of choosing to explain why your credentials are valid after all. Now, I've got credentials. Credentials of being alive. Credentials of having common sense. Credentials of knowing my surroundings. Yeah? Credentials of knowing what is what and what is. Like the physics of water, for instance. How we build and maintain pressure here on Earth. Yeah? Finally, it's important to remember that people might also attack the credentials of someone who isn't you, but whose stance is relevant to your argument in some way. For example, an individual using the credentials fallacy might try to dismiss your argument by saying that it relies on the reasoning of someone who lacks credentials in a relevant field. In such situations, you would generally respond using the same set of techniques that you would use if someone used the credentials fallacy against you directly. Right, then the next one's going to be how to avoid using the credentials fallacy yourself. Thank you.